Welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Sana Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. Once again in the debate, bringing you stories from around the world, also within Pakistan, bringing you different perspectives and different angles of stories so that you are able to form a complete opinion. For this episode of the show today, we have two very important stories. The first of which is with reference to President Joe Biden, who spoke yesterday at the anniversary of the Capitol Hill insurrection, in which he spoke about Donald Trump and his supporters posing a threat to democracy with what happened last year on January 6, 2021. He spoke about this riot of the Capitol Hill, and he spoke about how Trump and his supporters on that day and even now continue to pose a threat to democracy, and America's government system still is under immediate threat. It was not clear as to what Joe Biden was referring to when he spoke about being a threat to democracy. He has come under criticism with regards to his reference and his usage of this particular siege to put forward his own political gains, with particular reference to the voting rights bill that Congress wants to push forward. We'll discuss this in further detail as to how this particular speech has had an impact on the American public, what sort of a divide still continues to exist in the American nation, the kind of actual challenges that the democratic system and the government has in America, and then of course what was the real purpose behind this particular mention and the kind of statements that have been coming out from the Democrats. We'll also be taking a look at the situation in India. We know that the Indian regime, the government, the political leaders, people of influence continue to put forward a propaganda campaign against Muslims that has seeped into the larger audience in the Indian public. We see a lot of reports, a lot of incidents coming out from the Indian side where the common people of India have a lot of hatred against Muslims and also other minorities within India. We've seen many videos and stories come out which are very obviously stating hate crimes. We also have seen political and influential leaders actually encouraging their supporters to go forward and discriminate against Muslims and encourage actions which are, of course, against respect or ethical rights of the citizens of India. In such an incident, in a recent video, we've seen a large population of Indian nationalists taking oaths against not interacting with Muslim businessmen and not buying anything from shopkeepers who are Muslim, not allowing land, not allowing Muslim tenants to be part of their property, and also outrightly harassing Muslims in neighborhoods. This, of course, has been going on various levels, and there is not much that we see is being done about it on an international scale. We'll talk about this in further detail as to the kind of hatred and genocide that currently exists in India. As always, we've been joined by Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Faisal in the studios, and we will be joined by two guests in our first segment, which is, of course, on the American democratic system and the recent statements made by President Joe Biden. For this segment, we have been joined by Scott Lucas, who's a political analyst, and we've been also joined by Mr. Anwar Iqbal, who's a senior journalist from the US. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us on the debate. Starting off with Scott, I would like to ask you the question with regards to what Mr. Joe Biden, of course, has stated on the anniversary, the 6th of January 2021. His breaking of his silence with regards to referring to Trump is, of course, news at the moment. But this particular incident was mentioned on the anniversary, quite a passionate speech, whereas in the past year, not so many references have been made with regards to how this particular incident is a historic event and was a threat to democracy. Why now is this coming from Joe Biden?
Well, in part, this is a speech because it is 1 year since the greatest threat, specific threat to American democracy, probably since the US Civil War, which was not just the attack on the Capitol, but the attempt by Donald Trump and his inner circle to hold on to power in the White House despite losing the election. This was, in other words, an American version of a coup attempt. Now, it did not succeed. In part, and this is where the headlines are focused, Joe Biden was talking about the former president and, quote, his web of lies, and how he incited supporters to act on that day a year ago. But there's something bigger, not only in Biden's speech, but in that of Vice President Harris, because this is not just a challenge from Trump. It's not just a challenge from his supporters. It's a challenge, for example, from state legislatures controlled by Republicans who are trying to restrict voting rights and are trying to manipulate elections, for example, by redrawing the lines of constituencies and disenfranchising people of color. So, in other words, the entire American system is being challenged beyond Trump by one of its main parties, the Republican parties, in many places. And this is in a 21st century atmosphere of disinformation versus information and division versus dialogue. So, in the words of Kamala Harris, these speeches were necessary, or they mark a test of the American spirit in what I think is an ongoing, challenge, the biggest challenge since 1865.
Mr. Anwar Iqbal, President Joe Biden has come under criticism that perhaps he was using the sentiment with regards to this incident to put forward political interest in terms of pressing for the voting rights bill that Congress has been pushing for. Could this be true?
Well, I think what the Democrats are concerned about are the midterm elections. It seems likely, quite likely actually, that the Republicans may recapture Congress in the midterm elections. And if that happens, that will make this government ineffective. So they want to ensure that they keep the House where they have a comfortable majority, and they also want to get more seats in the Senate. So far, indications are that the Republican may be able to retake Congress, and that really alarms the Democrats. But having said that, what Trump did on January 6th last year was the first experience. I have been here for almost 20 years. This is the first experiment with the type of mob politics that we see in the third world, where when a candidate loses an election, they gathers a crowd and they go. It happens in Pakistan. You must have seen it even from college level to the national elections. So you go to the winner candidate's place and just sort of ransack everything and make your anger known. Now, he not only tried to do that, but he also tried to take over Congress, and he tried to persuade the then vice president to actually declare the elections annulled so that he could remain in power. That kind of things do not actually happen in America or anywhere in the West. So yes, Biden has a point in denouncing Trump, and also I think there's another point that we should focus on, and that is the rise of the extreme right in America and American politics. They have come up. They were actually sleeping before that, but Trump got in touch with them, Trump activated them, and they have remained active since then, and they do want to influence the political process in America.
Yeah, Scott, I just wanted to ask, if we look at the Republican politics, the politics of the Republicans, of course, the political activism which we saw from Trump and his close associates in recent years, do you not think that in Republican politics, the Trump factor would be key in coming years?
Well, certainly, I think the calculation amongst many Republicans in Washington and in state legislatures is that they cannot get elected without some support from Trumpist voters, which explains why, for example, they take the knee before Trump. I mean, remember, just after the attack a year ago, the then Senate Majority Leader, now Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, not only said that these were criminal acts, he said this should be pursued through the criminal courts against Trump. Remember that Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, denounced the mob that attacked the Capitol. Yet within 2 weeks, he was in Florida kissing the ring of Trump and pledging to work with him to his utmost for the 2022 elections. So the reality is that the Republicans, while trying to block the Biden administration on voting rights and much more, is effectively, they're complicit with Trump. Because there's a second key point here. And that is, I think the fundamental miscalculation by someone like Mitch McConnell, one of the most important men in Washington, one of the most skilled politicians, he miscalculated that Trump could be controlled. He miscalculated 4 years of the Trump administration. I can stop him from.
Farrukh, when we speak about what was being highlighted in terms of the kind of threat that currently exists to the government, to the system in America, to the kind of threat that was posed last year to democracy, isn't it kind of ironic that the divide still continues to exist and was quite prominent in the absence of Republicans perhaps, or the continuing support that Trump still enjoys?
Right, and that is a very good question. Yesterday, because by Pakistan Standard Time, it was yesterday when everything was going on. So there was this discussion. Why is it that this event 1/6 is not being actually compared with 9/11 or something of that sort, right? Because it was an attack on America's not only seat of power but seat of democracy, and that is not a small thing, right? But the fact is that it was a failed coup. When a coup fails, it cannot be equated with something as substantial as something that actually terrorist or someone else actually got away with. Before I actually further dilate on this, let me compliment Anwar Iqbal Saab for his frame. At this moment, his frame reminds me of Da Vinci's chiaroscuro, technique, light and darkness. But regarding what I was saying earlier, when you talk about the political situation, there are certain facts which are real. One, the threat to democracy is there. Why is it there? Because the Republicans, particularly those who were outliers like Steve Bannon, have actually done something very intriguing in the past 1 year. They have installed people at the grassroots level who are going to tomorrow, when next election comes, they are going to actually count and appeal all the results. So that can actually change the situation from last year, and it can create a lot of problem. My understanding is that earlier Professor Lucas was talking about McConnell, and then of course Mike Pence was also mentioned. I think both of them are heroes of that day because they stood up against Trump at that time when it actually counted. But people will forget that as well, because if you have seen that joke going around by The Onion, that Biden is delivering a speech and he says that we should remember the lesson of 1/6, and that is hang Mike Pence. But regardless of that, at this moment it is important to stand up and talk about these threats which actually are posed to the system. But having said that, I think President Biden would not have actually mentioned Donald Trump had there not been enough pressure on him, because recently we have seen a miracle that was great. He actually, praised Donald Trump for vaccine preparation. And then all of a sudden, President Trump actually started taking a stand against anti-vaxxers. So that seems that he could have worked with all these elements. But right now, I think that as long as you are actually taking a stand and you keep on reminding people what is important, democracy can flourish. When it comes to voter rights bill versus voter suppression in the name of voter fraud, it actually reminds you that it is basically the civil war by other means. What are voter fraud supporters actually talking about? They are saying that blacks or minorities should be actually scrutinized and perhaps they shouldn't have access to voting. On the other side, voting rights people are those who are actually Lincoln's group. They are actually saying that you should be actually supporting their right to vote as well. So that continues, but I think America has the internal system to resolve these issues.
Absolutely. And when we speak about the kind of instances that you were mentioning with regards to Joe Biden in reference to Trump, does this not actually put a question mark on the credibility of his stance that he's taking right now as to how he has interacted with reference to Trump before, Mr. Anwar?
Sorry, what was the question? Can you repeat it, please?
My question was, does this not put a question mark on the credibility of the stance that Joe Biden is taking at the moment when we see in the past that his stance to Trump has been shifting?
No, I think Joe Biden is a Democrat and is accepted as by Democrat. That does not mean that he is a member of the Democratic Party, but he believes in democratic values and he's respected as such. So no, there are no doubts about his credibility. But I think we should look at the larger picture. The rise of right-wing extremism is a global threat. It is happening across the globe. See what's happening in our neighborhood in India. I mean, and they have taken over the government. This person, Mr. Modi, who is as much an extremist as you get anywhere in the world, he has been elected twice or already 3 times, and indications are that he will get re-elected again. And see how they deal with minorities, what they're doing to the Muslims, what they're doing in Kashmir and everything. So this is something that I would say that intellectuals across the globe, that people who believe in sanity, people who believe in equality, people who believe in human rights, they should get together and they should think of various options to deal with this. This is much more serious a threat than just sort of Trump versus Biden or Modi versus Congress or whatever.
Sure.
This is a very serious threat, and we need to get together and come out with a solution to this.
Yeah. Right, Scott. If the problem, of course, lies way deeper than just the individual of Trump, and Trump maybe is just symbolic of the kind of problems that the U.S. government currently faces, are there measures in place or strategies in place to be able to actually deal with the kind of cracks that now exist in the American system?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, as the poet laureate Amanda Gorman said at Biden's inauguration last year, the American system is wounded, but we still stand. You know, the system is still there despite Trump's threat. It stood for almost 250 years. Now, the question is, what do you do within that system? And you have to look at a Biden administration, which for a year, amidst a pandemic, amidst other historic challenges, has put through some historic legislation. The American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure plan for broadband, bridges, tunnels, the attempt to get through a historic budget, although it's being blocked by the Republicans for social and environmental policies. So in many respects, the basics of Biden's year and why he didn't come out and say it's all Donald Trump is, his focus was we need to get together and make the system work. Now, here we are a year later, and the Republicans in Washington are blocking most of Biden's legislation, including his budget, including voting rights, including measures to deal with climate change. And Donald Trump, although he's barred on Twitter, uses other platforms to continue to shout and disrupt and disinform. So I think this was a a reminder. It was a reminder that January the 6th last year was a wake-up call, not that the American system had been shattered, but that it needed to be defended. And I think the speeches yesterday, going beyond Democrat versus Republican, left versus right, were a reminder that we still need to defend that system for the sake of all Americans, not just some.
Anwar Saab, we know the fact that the American politics, obviously, you know, the elections, they revolve around the campaign donations. Obviously, the donors, they are very important in the politics of America. We know for the fact that Trump mastered the art of getting the donations, and Republicans, of course, they relied upon Trump for that reason. Could we say that in coming future, if Republicans, they want to have themselves minus Trump, of course they would be seeing a problem getting the donations, the right donations for the campaigns? Don't you think that the factor will actually affect the Republican politics?
Yes, two things, finances and also this concept that Trump is a popular leader. He can get the voters out, make them vote, and therefore, whoever wants to win in midterm function elections, he or she needs Trump's support. And I think Republicans need to come out of this and look at the larger picture. I mean, yesterday, some of the reaction of some of the Republicans are very worrying, like Lindsey Graham. I mean, he said that I hope Biden sought Taliban's permission before making his speech, and that his speech will make the Taliban very happy. And he tried to very conveniently bring Afghanistan into it. And a lot of Republicans do that, and they forget that the agreement signed with the Taliban was actually nurtured by Trump. He was very close to concluding it, and he had even committed to withdraw American troops before, I mean, by March this year. Had he been elected, probably the troops would have been out of Afghanistan even earlier. So, but somehow this fear that if they are seen as opposing Trump, they may lose the elections, actually are making the Republicans forget the larger picture. And as you mentioned, this campaign financing. You see, I used to live until sort of August this year next to the head offices of the National Rifle Association. And I have seen sort of what sort of influence these people had on American politics, and they are staunch Republicans, and they support people like Trump, and have very close relations with them. So America also needs to find a way of dealing with this entire process of of collecting money, and therefore having a say and supporting the person whoever you think is suitable for you, whether he or she is good or bad, that does not matter. They need to actually, there is a need for, I think, I would just, not just in America, everywhere, I think we need to reconsider how the current democratic system works, which of
Right.
course includes campaign
Scott,
financing.
one last question for Scott. Scott, what we saw yesterday, it was a very impressive speech from Kamala Harris as well. And there are certain reports that President Biden, he has some obviously health issues as well. So could we see in coming future that Kamala Harris takes up the center stage of presidency?
Well, I think Joe Biden's already indicated he wants to run for a second term in 2024. But you know what? A week is a long time in politics, and 2024 is a long time away. I think what's more important is what you're talking about is, does Kamala Harris take a more visible presence in American politics now? I think she has been kept in the background to an extent by the Biden administration to establish Biden's authority. She's been given some very difficult briefs, like the immigration brief, the voting rights brief. I would hope that Kamala Harris is put more to the fore as a spokesperson, again, not as a president in waiting, because that's not the way we should look at it, but simply as one of the leaders that we need at this moment in America, as well as Joe Biden, and as well as a lot of people at the state and local levels to stand up against what Anwar Iqbal has identified as this threat to democracy.
Thank you very much, Scott Lucas and Mr. Anwar Iqbal, for being with us and sharing your views on this segment. Farrukh, before we conclude this segment, an important aspect which was highlighted by Mr. Anwar was perhaps the fact that the kind of threats to democracy that the American system faces is shared by other democracies as well. And we saw that the aspects of false propaganda or fake news or even involvement of foreign forces with regards to influencing public opinion was also at the core of the elections last time. What do you think needs to be done about that, or whether or not America is really looking at it from that angle and putting steps in place for that?
Right. I think America is doing that already. But before that, I have to actually address one question that was asked by Faisal, if you allow me.
Sure.
I think Vice President Kamala Harris is a great woman, and I think that she deserves her own run in power. And I think that when you look at the accomplishments of Joseph Biden's rule, 1 year in power, you will realize that there is no dearth of accomplishments, from bailouts because of the COVID-19, then rollout of the vaccine, and eventually we saw the infrastructure bill, which was very impressive. Among those very important accomplishments is also introduction of first woman, first part black, part South Asian from our land, right? Vice president into power. But there's a reason why I snorted at that time when he was asking about whether she can step into power, because at the start, and right-wing media has been shameful in this kind of pursuit, that initially they kept on insinuating that somehow Biden is incapable of thinking, so she is actually pulling all the strings. And later on, when they saw that Biden is his own man, then all of a sudden they started disparaging her and showing that she is some kind of weak, candidate, Julia Dreyfus and all that kind of attitude, right? The fact is that President Biden is working quite heroically, and we should be celebrating it. And Kamala Harris is doing her bit, and we should be very proud of that as well. Regarding this comparison, and I'm sorry, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes more, and then I will shut up for the entire program if you ask me to. But there are two aspects which are very important. I don't see this binary between Narendra Modi and Donald Trump. Narendra Modi, when he became Prime Minister, was already accused of killing 2,000 people in Gujarat, right? And what is his education? What is his accomplishment in life? Nothing. When you talk about Donald Trump, he was a permanent presence in the US imagination, and he was considered the emblem of American dream. I mean, you become rich, you remain rich, you marry models and build things and have your children and all that, right?
Darling of media.
That continued for quite some time. The only problem is, yes, he was the man who was actually tempted by other people or populists. There's a book called Corruptible, Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. It is written by Brian Klaas, and I will ask all your readers to read, viewers to read it, because it is a great book. It gives you the concept of a dark triad. The dark triad is Machiavellism, narcissism, and psychopathy. Where these three things combine, then you can have problem. And I think that shows in Donald Trump as well. So you'll have to actually first address this matter. Why is it the wrong kind of candidates are attracted to power? Once you actually take care of that and encourage people who are the correct kind of people, then you will have the right kind of security for democracy. But one last statement, we forget that the only country that actually fought a civil war where the right side won is the US, right? So don't think that democracy is going anywhere in the US right now. It is going to stay there.
Hopefully, well, of course, but as we mentioned, the threat or the system has its problems, but of course, a lot needs to be done in terms of addressing that. We also, of course, see that there are many issues with what is going on within India, and the kind of problems that the Indian regime is advocating for, encouraging in the people, has seeped into the hearts of the people and the way that they interact. We've seen so many reports coming out. We'll talk more about this in detail. We've also been joined by Mr. Pervez Jamil Mir, who's a senior journalist, and he has joined us to talk about this segment. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us on the debate. With regards to the kind of spread and the increase in religious extremism, in Hindu nationalism, in discriminating against the minorities in India, not just Muslims, it is, of course, quite a horrific state of affairs, especially when we see so many large groups of common people discriminating against the minorities, and especially Muslims in India. It seems that all of the propaganda campaigns, the kind of encouragement of hate that has been given by the political and leaders of influence has actually come forward with a vast scale of hatred that is now spread and visible in Indian population.
First of all, I'll say that, look, when we speak about India, There are good people in India. It's most unfortunate that India has been hijacked by a bunch of radicals, by those people who have basically degraded humanity, who have performed, their acts in the most abysmal sort of manner, which we are seeing here. Now, what they have come out by, what perhaps even in Americas earlier on, when they got rid of the Red Indians and others got rid of the Aborigines. And this is what they want to do on the subcontinent, of trying to get rid of the Muslims and what we call as, ethnic cleansing. So they've already started in Kashmir. They've done it with the Sikhs. They've done it with the Hindus, the good Hindus. They've done it with Dalits. They've done it, and loads of indigenous movements in Nagas, Visus, Assam, Tripura, Khalistan, and of course not forgetting Kashmir. So this, I feel, studying what's going on in India, it's the start of disintegration of India. India, we were looked upon as a democracy, but now it has converted itself into democracy. I mean, we've got demons there. This RSS is unfortunately not the real India. There are good political parties, which I think, who've been running India. It's just that India has been hijacked. So we just have to wait and see. And what Nasiruddin Shah said, that, Muslims are at least ready. And don't forget, I hope it never reaches that stage. But if it does reach that stage, the Khalistan movement people will be there, the Nagas will be there, and there is an imminence of a civil war in India. So
Right.
we don't
Peter
want
Meets
civil
up.
war in India.
Peter Meets up. Something needs to be said about a country that actually discards a prime minister like Manmohan Singh, who has a PhD and who actually is responsible for India's economic revival, and actually trades in, gets Narendra Modi elected to the power. What do you say to that country?
Well, you see, like any other politician, Modi came in, trying to reform India, trying to get, look after the poor guy. Obviously, him coming from an impoverished background, as a tea boy. Of course, he's seen poverty in India. Of course, which is appreciated. But he has converted that into a different situation. You look at 2002 in Gujarat, what he did to the Muslims, and now coming in onto the main, the major platform. Look what he's doing now. So I think it is high time that, at least as far as the Muslim or the OIC is concerned, they ought to be taking some serious view of it. I mean,
Let's talk about that in further detail, Mr. Pervez. We have a short report for our audience, and we'll take a look at that before we continue our discussion.
The Hindu ideology in the Modi's fascist regime has created a chaos in India. For the pursuit of the united India, the BJP, since coming into power, have performed actions that no sane human can. Modi, the PM of India and a lifelong member of the RSS, has injected the extremist ideology in the people of India. From burning of homes to murdering of Muslims by the vigilante cow protection groups, India has completely been saffronized. Thousands of Hindu nationalists have pledged an oath to boycott Muslim-owned businesses, denying housing to Muslim tenants, and harass them. For 7 decades, India has been held together by its constitution, which promises equality to all. But Narendra Modi's BJP is remaking the nation into one where some people count as more Indian than others.
Well, of course, as you saw the report, we know that the situation keeps on deteriorating in India, and so many such instances have been coming forward. What we were earlier discussing, Mr. Pervez, was of course with reference to what needs to be done about it, or as you mentioned, Muslim countries or countries with regards to the OIC need to be stepping up and doing something about it. But there is a general silence as to what is going on in India. There is no consequence as to what is going on in India. A lot of the actions that India continues to take are not being met with any consequence. And we may keep on saying that perhaps India is not a real democracy anymore in that sense, but it is being interacted with as a democratic state, and that doesn't change irrespective of what is going on in India.
Well, what could you say about that? I mean, you can call anybody democratic, but the norms of democracy, are they there? Is this democracy or democracy? I mean, it's a clear indication and a show of democracy. I mean, the Indian High Commissioner is here in Islamabad. I'm sure he sees the resentment of the people. I mean, you've got to see not people for the religious beliefs. You've got to see people, as human beings. I mean, is this what you're doing to human beings? Forget the beliefs. I mean, we respect Hindus. Hindus ought to respect the Muslims and Christians and vice versa and all other communities. So what is this band of people? What do they want?
But India continues to be an important
India?
player in the international arena. India still is a very important player in the international arena and continues to be. Yes.
There's no two ways about it. India is a superpower. We acknowledge it. But we don't acknowledge the barbaric acts which have been going on in Kashmir. We don't accept what is going on against the Sikhs. We don't accept what is going on against the Dalits and other minorities, and particularly the Christians. We don't accept the torture and the barbaric activities of the junta. So I think what we need to do is we need to address this in the General Assembly. We need to address it on the international podium. But unfortunately, as you say, India being a superpower, nobody takes any notice of it, not even in the Muslim countries. And here, I say, we don't want to be India-centric. Let anybody be friends with India. We don't have an issue. What our issue is a humanitarian issue. And that is what needs to be addressed by the international, or what we call the global village. And I think the global village is failing miserably because they're not taking any action at all.
Sana, if you allow me, I just wanted to add something. As we are seeing day by day, the footages are coming from on-ground India, where common Indians are being fed with the hatred against Muslims, all of the minorities, but specific hatred towards the Muslim. I just wanted to remind the viewers about how things went when anti-Semitism started in Germany. Obviously, the Hitler, the Nazis, what was their modus operandi at that time? If we take the examples from 1933-34, there was a sort of within the population, they wanted to limitize the influence plus the participation of the Jews in the public. And then come the laws of Nuremberg, 1935. Then what they did was they institutionalized all of the ideology against the Jews. And then if we talk about 1937, 38, 39, that hatred actually increased to such extent that government itself wanted the Jews, if they want to obviously intermingle or go to the society, then they had to wear the marks, they had to wear the proper badges to represent themselves as the Jews rather than the Germans. So this is what is happening, and then everyone saw what was the result. They were packed and they were sent to obviously different locations, and from there
concentration camps.
Yeah, they were killed over there. And this is what is happening. The first stage is going on in India right now. We saw in 1930s, world was very late to address them issues, and now we are seeing once more, world is once more getting late to address these situations in India. And I think United Nations and the huge or biggest organizations like the ones who are giving lectures everyone on human rights, they need to come forward, regardless of India being the biggest market or whatever. They need to put that on aside and think about the humanity, think about saving the world from another disaster.
Right, and perhaps maybe the situation may not be as obvious or blatant as concentration camps as it was, but it is under the garb of what is going on within India, within other measures that are being taken to make the space even tighter as the day goes by for the people that are living in India of Muslim faith. When we speak about the kind of instances that you were mentioning, Faisal, that are happening in the common public, we see that a lot of this is now what they believe in, that's what their perspective is, that's how they see the world and the people around them. When we see such kind of hatred, Farrukh, what really can be done to quell it? What can be done to change a person's mind if they're so sure of what they think is the right way to look at it, especially when there's such a coordinated campaign going on to form that opinion?
Right, and the first answer to your question, then I have to actually correct a bit about what Faisal was saying, and then of course I have to talk a little bit about what PJ Saab was saying as well regarding the hatred and all. I think that at this moment the situation can be recovered. The only thing is, if you read India's constitution's preamble, when entire CAA protests were going on, the Indian moderates actually started doing this, that they started reciting the preamble. And it's a beautiful preamble. It promises the sun and the moon to the people. It talks about equality, equity, and not communalism, but secularism in the country. I think it was a work of a genius, and that can help Indians, right? Regarding what you were saying, that situation might not be that dire as was Nazi camps, right, concentration camps. I think you are forgetting what happened in Assam, where they actually came up with the NRC, and where 2 to 3 million people were declared non-nationals, and some of them have actually served, because they are poor Muslims. They have served, some of them have served in their army and fought wars with Pakistan. And they were declared that, and after that they created concentration camps where they are going to be booked till the time they are expelled from the country, right? So this is exactly what has been happening. If the world wants to sleep, it is their choice. Regarding what Faisal was saying, my problem is that Nazi Germany's total population of Jewish people was not that big.
Exactly.
Today, India's Muslim and minority population is bigger than Nazi Germany's. When you are trying to do this thing to such a big number, it is going to create such a horrible situation that is going to actually totally A, break India, B, destroy civilization all over the world, and it will create a kind of dynamic that will never stop, because we have been fighting terrorism among ourselves as well. If you get these people radicalized, and if you have civil war in India, what is going to happen? Regarding what PJ Mir Sahab was saying, he was talking about Bal Modi. That is the myth of Modi, the tea seller when he was a kid. Amazingly, people need to actually read up on this, because the alleged tea selling train station that where Modi allegedly used to sell tea, actually that station was not built until he was a grown-up man. So this must be something that has been created. I think Narendra Modi was, is, and will be a street urchin. And he was elevated because of that, because he was one of the goons of RSS, and he actually proved his mettle by killing people, and he got normalized, and now because he is in power, he brought people like himself, like Yogi Adityanath, Ajay Bisht, whose actual name is, and people like that into power, and now they are actually pressing more people to do exactly the same. And the world, if it doesn't wake up, we will have a crash of civilization in coming.
Absolutely. But despite that, Farrukh, as you said, that the situation can still be turned around. That, of course, is a difficult way to go forward, specifically when we talk about de-radicalization. It is something difficult to achieve. Moving forward, if we really want to do something about it, Mr. Pervez, then the kind of efforts that we've been doing in our own capacity in terms of talking about these issues or highlighting what's going on, or talking and speaking about this on various international fora, these are all tried and tested methods. What's the point of repeating and knocking on the same doors again and again when we're not getting a response? If we really want to turn things around, what do we need to do about it?
You're absolutely correct. Because no matter what government you go to, they will not take any action because they'll say that's their own internal affair. But what they fail to understand and realize is it's a blatant violation of human rights. And the only way, to your question, to move forward is to create an international lobby of human rights activists, human rights organizations who will put pressure onto the respective governments, and then we'll get some results out of it. Trust me, there is no other way, because if there was a way, well, the world would have acted. The world hasn't acted in 70 years on Kashmir, the brutalities which the Indian army has done on their own people. I mean, the world sits and and examines. And I tell you, in one of my interviews with Henry Kissinger, I did put this question. I said, Mr. Kissinger, this long-standing issue of Kashmir, what have you done? And he laughed. And he says, look, this is where I came in 40 years ago. And what happens? Well, nothing. 0 minus 0. So the Americans have no interest in Kashmir. The British Parliament has no interest in Kashmir, although we have friends of Pakistan. We've got friends of India. They're all there, but they're all good for a good cup of tea. And that's about it. Nobody realizes that try going to India. They don't even let the United Nations observers, man the borders. You try get any of the parliamentarians in there. They don't even let them get in there. Although we entertain the parliamentarians here in Pakistan in Azad Kashmir. We showed them what was actually happening, but India denied them. So what we need to do is actually create an international lobby. And this we can do very comfortably with the OIC. If that is, they don't become paper tigers. We need to get them and tell them, look, forget about the Kashmir dispute. Please look after what is happening right now. I mean, that this documentary or the footage you showed, I mean, isn't that brutal? Isn't that
right,
horrible?
Mr. Pervez, can the OIC really be mobilized for this purpose? Can we get them on board and mobilize them together for this purpose? Can that actually happen?
Of course. Well, they got together for Afghanistan, didn't they? What is happening? They got together for Afghanistan to see that Afghanistan, gets back on its feet. So why can't they do it for those helpless people out there who have got nothing? They've got nothing to look up to. They've got nothing to look back on. And the only hope they have is, people who really care, who really matter. And that is the OIC. We've got to get this organization into a really, playing a solid role, which unfortunately they don't. Like I said, they all have their relations with India, which is fine by us. All we are asking is, please look after the human rights and, the atrocities being committed by the Indian army and, of course, by the junta, that they need to be checked. I mean, they are going against all the United Nations, resolutions. And yet, here we are. As a Pakistani, I can't buy any land in Azad Kashmir. Yet, they've allowed...
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Pervez Jamil Mir, for being with us and sharing your opinion. Yes, Faisal, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, the footages which are coming, in one of the footages, it was being said to people that give an oath that you would never do any transaction, a land buying or land selling transaction with the people. But at the same time, the real estate business of Kashmir, it is trying to, the government is trying to promote it, trying to bring people from other places, bring into Kashmir and buy the land from Kashmiris. Double standards of India and
But-
purposeful double standards of India.
Of course, it is unfortunate that at the end of the day, the cost are people, the cost are individuals, and at their cost, all of this is being done, and it must be stopped. But of course, there is going to be a lot more effort perhaps required to make the world actually listen and do something about it. We'll continue to do that, but of course, the world needs to play its part as well. Thank you very much for watching the debate.